We welcome you to another edition of Being Well Informed. My name is Claudia Barber, and I am the host of this podcast slash television program that we feature on a weekly basis. We are so delighted this evening to have with us the illustrious Alice Faye Duncan. Hello.
Thank you, Attorney Barber, for the invitation. Hello.
Welcome to Being Well Informed. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your work as an author.
Well, I have been writing books for children for 30 years now. My first book was The National Civil Rights Museum Celebrates Everyday People, which was a history and a chronology of the American Civil Rights Museum. And today I'm here to talk with you about my book, Evicted: The Struggle for the Right to Vote in America. And, hopefully maybe we can talk about my Juneteenth book as well. And if you want to talk about my blues book, we can talk about that. But today, I really hope we delve into Evicted: The Struggle for the Right to Vote.
How did this book come into fruition? Why the struggle for the right to vote? Why the emphasis there?
Okay, so Evicted came about, I guess it was like in 2006. I live in the city of Memphis, and I was attending the funeral of one of the Black dignitaries in our city. And the great civil rights photographer, Ernest Withers, was at that funeral. And
Wow.
at the time, it was like, yeah, it was 2006. I was researching the Memphis sanitation strike of
Mhm.
1968, which is when Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis. So I was
That brought him to Memphis.
ma'am.
That brought him to Memphis.
Exactly. That strike is the thing that brought him to Memphis. And Ernest Withers, as you see his photograph on the screen there, Ernest Withers is one of the last photographers to photograph Dr. King in Memphis. So 2006, Ernest and I are attending the same funeral. I'm researching the book on the sanitation strike, and I ask him if I can interview him for that book. He says yes. I go to his Bill Street photography studio, and when my interview with him is over, we exchange books. So he gives me a book of his civil rights photographs, and I give him a copy of my civil rights book, Everyday People. And when I get home, I'm looking through his book, and one of the civil rights movements that he photographed was Tent City, from 1959 to like 1962. And exactly, there you go. Tent City was very important. And when I saw the face of these sharecroppers, when I saw these Black sharecroppers in West Tennessee, when I saw them standing in line, when I saw them living in tents, the first thing I wanted to know was, what was this movement about? Because I'd never heard of it. And Fayette County, which is where the movement happened, was 50 miles away from Memphis. So I just started researching the movement, and I discovered that Tent City from 1959 through 1962 was the first grassroots voting rights movement in America. And it is Tent City in West Tennessee, Fayette County, Tennessee. Tent City, that voting rights movement, is the movement that inspired, listen well, this movement in Tennessee of Black sharecroppers to vote. It inspired John Lewis, SNCC, Dr. King. It inspired all of those civil rights leaders to then go into rural Mississippi, go into rural Alabama to also start a voting rights movement. So without these farmers, these Black sharecroppers in Tennessee, you don't have John Lewis going over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Without John Lewis going over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, you do not have the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So when you say what began the voting rights movement in America and what gave us the Voting Rights Act of 65, It is. It started with the impetus of Black sharecroppers in the state of Tennessee. This is a history that is seldom spoken of. It's unknown by a great majority of us. It's not often taught in elementary school, high school, or college. And because it's not often taught, I said, as one who writes books for children and as one who wants other children to be being well informed, yes, I said, let me write about this movement. And so I did, and that's what led me to the book there that you see. Yes,
Wow.
that book, Evicted: The Struggle for the Right to Vote, which you can pick up at any of your online bookstores. Evicted: The Struggle for the Right to Vote. You can pick it up at any of your local bookstores. And if your local bookstore does not have Evicted: The Struggle for the Right to Vote, you can simply call them and have them to order it for you.
That's wonderful. A wonderful accomplishment. I mean, our life, we think that we have time, but that's an important commodity. We have to use our time well,
We do.
and we should be creating a legacy. We should be doing the same thing you're doing, writing stories, putting them to paper, and telling the story, because when others tell your narrative, it's not the same. It's different. It's
You
different.
know, you know what happens, like, there are unscrupulous people in the world, and they are so unscrupulous that, they will say that your struggle and your triumph did not happen. They will distort your history so that it is propaganda that benefits some motive that they have. And therefore we have to be responsible. Like, we have to be responsible for our own history and do not leave it to others to write and share.
Agreed wholeheartedly. Now, you brought up the issue of not having others tell your story. This whole issue of book banning
Mhm.
has creeped up in the education arena, and it has had some impact in this country.
It has. And so, I am a retired school librarian. I was a school librarian for 30 years. And we know that information is power. And we know that a lack of information can literally disenfranchise a life, right? And so, the book banning movement, I think, just like we were marching when we wanted to annihilate Jim Crow laws and
Mhm.
segregation, just how we were marching when we wanted the right to vote, when we wanted fair housing, when we wanted fair education, just how we have rallied school boards for equity dollars in education. We have to fight and rail against the book banning movement because it is anti-intellectual, it is anti-democratic, and without an educated electorate, if your children are not educated, how can they know who to vote for when it is their time to vote? If your children are not educated, how can they be cognizant and aware that while they are sleeping, their voting rights are being gutted? If we don't educate our children, and if we don't fight against book banning, then how can our children understand that their labor rights, even though they have not even entered the labor force, but already their labor rights are being assailed, and people are trying not to give people employers are trying not to give workers medical benefits. Employers are trying not to give workers family time off. They're not trying to give workers adequate money to support daycare and nursery care. And so you want your children to be informed, you want them to be educated, and book banners are the antithesis of that. They want to paint the history so that it ignores the errors of our ways. And if we ignore the errors of our ways, we will repeat the errors of those olden days. And we don't want to repeat the era of the olden days, do we? No, we do not.
No, we don't. So, where do you think this book banning issue is going? So, certainly it has touched states, and it's appalling how certain books are being removed
I
from
think
the
the
library.
objective, I think the objective is to, remove anything that makes us assess the error of our ways, or to remove anything that clearly paints the picture of injustice that was egregious and that even continues today, and so that we can all be under the skies of, oh, there is no such thing as racism, there is no such thing as inequality, there's no such thing as needing justice in voting, because there's no such thing as gerrymandering, but there is.
Mm-hmm.
And it is happening. There's no such thing as voter suppression, voter intimidation, but there was, because that's what my book is about. And there's voter intimidation and voter suppression right now, right? But
Yes.
if I don't share books with children, letting them know what this is, what it looks like, then they won't know what it looks like when they turn on the TV and they see injustice happening before their eyes, if that
Right.
makes sense, right? And so
Yeah.
I educate the children so that they know, so that they know what so that they know what injustice looks like when they confront it. And also in my book, Memphis, Martin and the Mountaintop, which talks about Dr. King and the sanitation workers who stood up for themselves. My book, Opal Lee and What It Means to Be Free, which talks about grandmother Opal Lee, who helped inspire Juneteenth to become a national holiday. What my books do is they give children examples of bravery, because what children see, they will be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I need for children to see these examples of bravery so they will know how to confront injustice when it happens, so that they will know how to be, or they will know what models courage. And I want them to understand clearly, as my father used to say, no cross, no crown. I want children to understand clearly that anything worth having is worth the sacrifice. But then also on the other end of that, there is, like my book there, if you see it, Yellow Dog Blues, there is always room, praise the Lord, for joy. And so I don't want it to be like, oh, I'm just writing books about the civil rights movement, and I just, I want every child to be an activist, though I want them to have a spirit of activism. That is true. But I also write feel-good books and fun books, and books that celebrate childhood, like Honey Baby Sugar Child, which is not on display right now. I write books about joy and the celebration of families, like Just Like a Mama, which you can find all of my books, the ones about history and the ones that are stories that celebrate Black families. You can find all of my books at AliceFayeDuncan.com, and that's Alice Faye with an E, AliceFayeDuncan.com. And I want to add that those books also include free teachers discussion guides and
Wow.
free student activity guides.
So, if you were told that your book, Evicted, would be banned from the school library, and you're
God forbid. God forbid.
the struggle for the right to vote and would be evicted,
Mm-hmm.
from the school library.
Yes, ma'am.
And, your book, Memphis Martin, and the Mountaintop, that children's book,
Yes.
Opal Lee, that children's book.
Yes.
All of this is up for discussion,
Mm-hmm.
apparently, in some states, because these types of books might make certain people feel uncomfortable.
And
You
so
know,
what's your question? Like, if I found out that my books were
we're
banned or
banned.
being banned or
What
considered to be
solutions do you have?
the solution. Ignorance is deadly.
Mhm,
And so the best solution that I have is to convince young readers that
mhm,
ignorance is deadly. And though though perhaps someone would try to do that,
mhm.
but that cannot hinder me in my pursuit for writing history as it happened. And so I am not discouraged by the movement. I just know that it confirms that I need to continue to write with purpose, which is to give children an understanding of the history that we have inherited so that they will not repeat the eras of our American ways.
Charlie Palmer
Yes,
is a famous painter and
yes,
I understand the illustrator of Evicted. When
yes.
he was selected to illustrate your book, what was your reaction?
I felt that it was a very fortuitous moment. I felt that it was a privilege and an honor. And I was most excited because I am from Memphis, so I'm from the South. Charlie is from the South. And so I was excited because I knew that he comes from an agriculture background, a rural background is where he began his life, even though he lives in Atlanta now. And so I knew he would interpret the book through the lens of somebody who is close to the earth. And as I hoped and as I dreamed, the illustrations for Evicted have been have been celebrated already. It's in a New York exhibit for the Society of Illustrators. And people, teachers and school librarians are predicting that perhaps it will do great things in terms of book award season, because the illustrations are so poignant and moving. They're inspiring. Um, and so I just felt it was a lucky thing to
What
have
an
Charlie.
honor.
Yes, I felt
What
that it
an
was, yeah, not a
honor.
lucky thing, but a blessing and an honor to have Charlie as my illustrator.
Impressed with a moment near the beginning of the book where Charlie provides a cast list
Hmm.
of characters along with names, dates,
Hmm.
and one sentence descriptions. That's all in the book.
That's all in the book. And I must say that repeatedly, adult readers and children readers find that what Charlie did with highlighting each character in the book, their name, and then the title of their vignette, because the book is told in like what, 12 or 13 vignettes of the people who appear in the movement. I must also say that this book, it actually happened. I interviewed sharecroppers from
Mm.
the tent city movement. I went to Fayette County. I went to Fayette County in the middle of harvest season, which was like or the end of harvest season, which was like the end of October, 1st of November. Cotton was flying around in the air. Cotton was flying all over the highway as I was driving into the city, because it is still an agriculture town, and it's still a town where you can find cotton farms and you can find cattle farms, right? Um, and so, I just I interviewed uh these people, talked to them, they invited me in their homes. And so the book is really important to me because I think because the people invited me in their home, invited me into their homes, because I left my home and traveled to Fayette County to see where the tents were, to see where they would pick up their surplus for food when they didn't have any or couldn't buy any. It gave me a very organic feeling, a very spiritual feeling, like like I was being assisted by the ancestors, and I would discover something, find something in a book, find something in a news clipping, then go and try to find that in Fayette County. And I think writing the book in itself, it was a very spiritual moment. um and if you we are looking at the photographs that Ernest Withers took the photographs of the movement, and he published them in Jet magazine. He published them, and stop right there, he published them in Jet magazine. He published them in the Black Press, Pittsburgh Courier, Chicago Defender, Memphis Tri-State Defender. He published them in all of these Black press outlets, so that he could help generate funds and resources, so that when Black people all over the country read how these people, because what happened was the Black farmers went and registered to vote, and when they went to register to vote, the white planters evicted them, booted them off the land. And so it's like,
Homeless.
well, yeah. And did that stop them? No. So they said,
Mm.
you can boot me off the land. And then another Black man said, you know what? When you boot Black people in Fayette County off the land, I invite them to come to my land, because there was a farmer named Shepherd Tolles who had 200 acres of land. So he invited like 30 adults and like 100 children. He invited them to live in tents on his land when they were evicted because because the parents had dared to vote. And here, this picture are some of the participants in the movement. The woman that you see is Mary Williams. She and her husband were the first couple and their children to move into the tents on Shepherd Tolles' property when she and her husband went and registered to vote in November 1960. The young man in the glasses, his dad was Shepherd Tolles, the man who owned the property that gave the Black evicted farmers space to live. And then up at the top, the young man and the older gentleman, that's the same person. His name is James Jamerson, and James Jamerson was a child during the movement. His mom and dad were leaders of the voting rights movement in Tent City and Fayette County, and he was a child at that time. And what happened for him is, as he saw his mom and his dad, he had models, right? Had models of bravery in his home. As he saw his mom and his dad speaking up for their right to vote, collecting money, helping the evicted farmers, because they themselves own their property, so they could not be evicted, right? But as he saw his parents helping with this movement, when he got to be in the 12th grade, desegregation came to Fayette County. And they, of course, the Black community needed someone in the students in the Black community who would volunteer to desegregate the Fayette County High School. And because
mind you, this is long after 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education.
No, this is like literally 1967. You're right.
Terrible.
This is like 55 years ago, right? So this is 1957, which is 10 years and some change after Brown versus Board. And so he decides that, hey, mom and dad, if they need a volunteer to desegregate the high school, I will go. His mom and dad did not say, oh, James, would you like to go and desegregate the high school? James came to his mom and dad and said, I want to volunteer, because he had seen his mom and dad help those farmers who were living in tents. And he had seen his mother lose her job as a teacher because she had registered to vote.
Mm, mm, mm.
And I should add the reason, Fayette County was only like 50 miles away from Memphis, and Black people were voting in Memphis in 1962, but Fayette County was only 50 miles away. And the reason why those Black farmers had not registered to vote up until that time is because of the racial violence that plagued that rural area. So there were
Mm.
lynchings in the Fayette County, Somerville area. There were fires of people, homes being set on fire because they did something in the name of Black progress. Um, and so that is my testimony as to how I wrote Evicted, the struggle for the right to vote. But another testimony is that with Ernest Withers documenting those pictures,
Mm-hmm.
the pictures now pave a road to the past for the students and their parents who were not there in the past.
See, I think all of this should be required reading, for the curriculums in the school system today. That's just kind of my take on things. But, I think that this book, Evicted, is powerful. I think that it has a lot of historic information in it
It
that you
does.
just
And
can't refute.
it does. And so also with the book, what I discovered oh my God, this was one of the most important things that I discovered when I was writing the book. Can someone say Ella Baker? Say it again. Can someone say Ella
Ella
Baker?
Baker,
Can
yes!
someone say it again? Ella
Champion,
Baker. Okay. So
champion
what
Ella Baker.
Ella Baker. Okay, so what I discovered when I was researching this book is I found a letter from Ella Baker under the banner of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. At that time, in I think it was 1960, Ella Baker, I think, was the executive director of the SCLC. She was the first executive director of the SCLC until patriarchy removed her from that position. Okay, that's a whole nother program, baby. That's a whole nother program. Okay, but Ella Baker encouraged Dr. King to take $800 from the SCLC budget and send it to those Black farmers that were struggling for the right to vote. Another thing happened. James Foreman, as you know, many people know James Foreman. He was a part of SNCC. And I discovered that James Foreman taught third grade in Chicago before he became a big SNCC worker, right? That amazed me. But anyways, James Foreman also left Chicago, came, and he lived in those tents with the people temporarily, with the Black people, the sharecroppers, because
Yes.
he wanted to take back this information to Chicago and let people know, hey, this is how the people are struggling, and this is what we can do to help them. Well, check this out. When James Foreman was there in those tents with those people, witnessing their movement, witnessing how it was organized, and how they had established this grassroots voting rights movement, it is also James Foreman who took that information with him to SNCC, took that information to John Lewis. I mean, so it's like this is how the ideas or the synergy of an idea, how it comes, and then it helps, it helps trailblaze, a movement forward. And so those are some of the interesting things that I learned. I also learned that it was John F. Kennedy. He got inaugurated in 1960 in January, and a reporter at his first press conference said, President Kennedy, what are you going to do about those Black farmers in Tennessee who are living in tents? And at that moment, he had never heard of the farmers. He didn't know what was happening. But at that moment, he committed to helping them. And then, and in a month's time or so, then, he sent trucks of food and supplies for the farmers who were living in tents in Fayette County. And so it's a movement of courage. It's a movement of determination that so few people know about, but they see the flower of the movement. They see the blossoming of the movement when those folks are marching. John Lewis, Dr. King, when they're marching across that Edmund Pettus Bridge. That is the legacy of the tent city movement and the voting right. The 1965 Voting Rights Act is the jewel of the tent city movement, 1959 to 1962 in Fayette County, Tennessee.
Alice Faye Duncan, what a privilege and honor to have you here on our program, Being Well Informed. We appreciate you so much, and hopefully it won't be your last time on our program. Thank
Thank you
you.
for the invitation. Thank you.